Well, with this introduction, you probably expect that I'm going to tell you what we should believe about democracy, or at least how we should think about democracy. But you'll be disappointed. And you'll be disappointed because the work that I have been doing over, indeed, decades, Ruben, seems not to be confirmed or at least be put seriously into question by the recent events, particularly in the United States. So what you're going to hear from me today is a combination. I will tell you what I used to think was true. I will tell you how I used to think we should think about democracy. And then I will share with you the reasons that I'm very uncertain about the beliefs that I've developed over almost 50 years. It's salutary always to put things in perspective. And this is a broad historical perspective. If you think in terms of history, you have to get the sense of historical fragility of democracy. It really is a moment, if you think in terms of thousands of years. As you see, power changes hands over the past 200 years, almost as often by force than by elections. And something that one should always keep in mind, as of my last count, there are 68 countries still in the world, including the two elephants, that have never had the experience of a government losing an election. Power change hands, but never through the electoral mechanism. Here you have a little picture of democracies as a proportion of countries. The shaded area is the number of countries. The line is the proportion of democracy. I will not comment on it. You probably all can interpret it immediately. This is something that I do want to pause on. And this is the distribution of the maximum length of democratic spells since 1788 until now. As you see, there are very few democracies that are really long-lasting. Yes, and the most long-lasting one is one in the United States. There are relatively few that last more than 100 years. The model duration of democracy is about 30 years. Few already over 50 years. So you have a sense of fragility. And I always thought I should always have a sense of concern. This I will actually skip for the sake of time. So what do we know? What did we know? I think there are tens of thousands of articles about conditions under which democracies come about and conditions under which they survive or fall. I believe that there are really 2.5 factors that tell the whole story. One is, this is something that Fernando Limonge and I observed first in 1997. Democracies never broke down in wealthy countries. When we wrote the paper in 1997, the wealthiest democracy that ever collapsed in the world was the one in Argentina in 1976. Already then, there were some 40 democracies with incomes higher than that of Argentina. In 1976, they lived together over 1,000 years. No one ever fell. Economic crisis, political crisis, divorce crisis, corruption crisis, they survived. There was a story about this that developed in several articles by various people. And basically the argument was that if people with higher income value the additional unit of income less, yes, if utility functions in income are concave, then in wealthy countries, at least distributive conflicts over distribution matter less. So conflicts are attenuated. The second factor that is very robust is that democracies never break down if a country had experienced some number of past peaceful alternations in office through elections. As a matter of fact, 5 is the critical number. No country which experienced 5 parties and alternations in office, in no country as such, which has this property, democracy has ever collapsed. And here the story is, people get used to it, yes? They think, yeah, there's going to be an election, maybe we're going to lose, but we're going to have another chance. Maybe we're going to win, maybe we're going to lose again, but nothing big happens in elections. Yes, there are losers, there are winners, I'm going to go back to it. But there's nothing to be afraid of, probably nothing to use force against. The third factor is inequality. This is very tricky because statistical results depend quite a lot on the kind of inequality measures one uses, both the sources or the moments of the distribution, whether one uses Gini indices or ratios, labor share is top 1%. Results are not quite robust. And in fact, if you estimate a model, statistical model, in which you ask, what is the probability that democracy will fall in an income which, in a country that has this income and this number of past alternations in office? It's going to fit extraordinarily well. It's robust to time periods, to estimators. Those 2 factors will explain 80% of cases. And this is basically an introduction to the second part of my talk, which you have to wait for a few minutes. When I estimate this model, the probability that democracy would fall in a country with income in the past democratic history of the United States is 1 in 1.8 million country years. Now, a little bit of theory. I believe the point of departure of any political analysis of anything are conflicts. There are big conflicts, there are small conflicts over all kinds of things. Some are distributive, some are because some people interfere in the life of others, some are just driven by ego factors. I was struck that even very minute symbolic issues sometimes evoke passionate conflicts. There was a great center forward of Manchester United, Nicolas Anelka, who refused to sing the French national anthem, the Marseillaise, because the Marseillaise at one time says, aux armes les citoyens, citizens to arms, and he says, I'm a pacifist, I'm not going to sing that. And there was a huge debate in France of whether football players should be forced to sing the national anthem. As a matter of fact, one government in Weimar Germany fell because it wanted to change the colors of the German flag. So, as I said, even minute kind of symbolic issues can evoke passions. And this is then the question that I've been asking for years and years and years. So how do we manage these conflicts without curtailing freedom, without repression? I'm going to go quickly over that part because I want to spend some time on the second one. I think we do it mainly through elections. Elections are a conflict processing mechanism. And they are particular. There are other conflict processing mechanisms, courts, collective bargaining, all kinds of mechanisms. But elections are the only mechanism which is open to all citizens. What happens in elections, we all know. Parties offer candidates and programs. Somebody's declared winner. The winner assumes office. The loser goes to the back bench. And then we have a next election. I want to say many people are disappointed. I once used to play these games with the audience. Well, losers are disappointed. And in most elections, the winner doesn't win much more than 50% of the vote. As a matter of fact, very often short of 50% of the vote, as Ruben knows very well from his dissertation, yes? So a lot of people are disappointed by the outcome. And I used to run surveys with the audience. About half of the people who vote for the winner, a few years later, are still disappointed that the winner is not doing what it promised, et cetera, et cetera. So most people are disappointed with the elections, and what happens? They hope the next time they're going to win, and they hope the next time the winner is going to implement its program. Elections are a siren song of democracy. We really believe it. So what happens in elections? Elections generate winners and losers. Somebody has a policy, gets elected, and to some extent at least implements this policy. Winning, obviously better than losing. Losers have the choice. Do we accept the result, or do we try to engage in some forms of conflict that are costly and in the extreme in violence? And indeed, most democracies until about 20 years ago fell because of coups d'etats, because of use of force, and a lot of them because of the use of force by the people declared to be electoral losers. Here is something, a quote from 1919 by John McGurk, who was the chairman of the Labour Party in 1919. You can read it for yourself, yes? Industrial action meant general strike, yes? He said, we participate in elections or we don't. If we participate in elections and we lose, we go home. We don't start general strikes against results to the election, yes? Reacting by other means to the immediate victory, electoral victory of somebody is certainly anti-democratic. Not democratic. So when do elections process conflicts in peace? I think there are two conditions. Losers cannot lose too much. If everything is at stake, if your way of life is at stake, if your religion is at stake, if your racial purity is at stake, I use these words deliberately because that's the language of a lot of autocrats, yes? Then you will not accept a defeat. And two, losers have to believe that they will be able to win in some foreseeable future. Yes? In the US, in 2000, yes, Bush was declared winner by the Supreme Court, and Gore accepted a defeat. And all the Democrats thought, well, but in 2004, we're going to win. In 2004, Republicans won more cleanly than in 2000. And then in 2000, and Democrats thought we're going to win in 2008. And what happened in 2008? The country which elected Bush and Cheney elected Obama. And then the Republicans thought, well, but we're going to win in 2012, and they failed. We're going to win in 2016, and 2016, the country which elected Obama elected Trump. But this is the mechanism, yes? The mechanism is that the incumbents do not foreclose the possibility that the current losers would be able to assume office. Winners, therefore, cannot make their victory too costly to the losers and cannot close the possibility of being electorally defeated. So we get an equilibrium. And when I say equilibrium, for those of you in the know, this is indeed a result of some game theory models, of which I wrote some and many others wrote many others, which is various variants of this kind of assumptions. And one of the equilibriums is that winners basically don't inflict too much of a cost, that they reserve some limits in their discretion to policy making, and they get some electoral advantage, which I think the losers have to, temporary losers have to tolerate, that the winners would, do something to be able to enhance their chances in the next election, but not too much. There are thresholds. So when these conditions are satisfied, then elections process conflicts in liberty and peace. So one question is, so why would the winners behave in a moderate way, both in terms of policy and in terms of electoral chances? There's a new literature on backsliding in which a lot of people ask, so why do these people, Erdogan, Orban, Chavez, Modri, why do they backslide? I think it's a wrong question. The wrong question is, why doesn't everybody? What stopped politicians? Yes, politicians want two things. One is to be in office forever, and to do in the office whatever they want. So why is it that a lot of them don't do that? And there is literature on that topic again. Some invoke internal controls. Europe, in general, which has the part of Europe which has a strong parliamentary tradition, has all kinds of institutional devices in which parliamentary procedures and often bodies located within the parliament put constraint on the chief executive. Some countries, I think, this one, the head of the parliamentary committee, which oversees government expenditures, has to be a member of the opposition party. In many countries, there are constitutional bodies which are built into the parliaments, which can rule before the law is promulgated, whether the law is constitutional or not. Conseil constitutionnel en France, for example, Holland, Norway, etc., etc. So there are internal devices. In the American tradition, adopted to a large part in Latin America, there are all kinds of anti-majoritarian institutions, mainly courts, yes, which can judge constitutionality of laws already promulgated, and recently central banks. And there are external controls. One is the shadow of force. That is that if the government goes too far, violates freedom of religion, for example, or denies the electoral chances for the opposition, then people come on the street, and in many cases, the military come on the street with tanks. So that's the shadow of force. And two, many government needs cooperation of bankers and bricklayers. If it takes extreme measures at the opposition may withdraw cooperation in different forms. And I say markets in there because one of the things that most chief executives look at are markets, stock markets or exchange markets. Actually, I think I can. I once talked to a president of Brazil, Fernando Henrique Cardoso, and he was just elected about a year earlier, and I asked him, so what do you feel most constrained by? The Congress? He said, no, the Congress I can manipulate, and he could not manipulate. public opinion is not public opinion. I am convinced. I said, what is it? The market. That's what he was afraid of, yes? This is why most governments adopt policies anticipating economic consequences and very often stock market consequences. But anyway, I think that these are the, if you look through the literature, and there are lots and lots of papers on this, particularly recently, very nice game theoretic papers on this, you will find that these are the two factors which people adduce to explain why is it that not all chief executives, as a matter of fact, few chief executives grab for power, both in terms of policy discretion and in terms of electoral chance. So this is the conclusion, and I'll give you some references at the end. This is really a conclusion of, sorry to say that, but it's almost 50 years of work on the topic. And there we come. US. What's happening in the US? So far, does not violate any properties of democracy as most people understand it. In the following sense, Trump was elected. This time, as opposed to 2016, he actually got a small majority of vote. He had a program. He's implementing this program. He is engaging in numerous actions that border on illegality and in some cases are patently illegal. I give you a number of, as of March 11th, I think that what last time I looked at was 137 cases in which some federal judges, because the US is a federal system which has 700 and some judges, said, no, no, this action is illegal, this action is illegal, this action is illegal. And the government so far is playing a game of saying they will comply and then not complying, saying nothing and not complying. It's coming to, I don't have to say, I think it's coming to a boil. It's coming to a boil of an immigration case. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. It's coming to a boil of an immigration case. Lawyers, I don't want to offend constitutional lawyers if there are any in the room. I think hopeless. All they can say, if the government disobeys laws, there will be a constitutional crisis. And what? Because I think that's as far as they can think, that whether the government is complying, not complying. But if it doesn't comply, I mean, one way to think about it, due to Sturgeon and Pasquino, is to think of it this way. Yes? The government is elected, passes laws, the court says that is illegal or unconstitutional. And then what? Well, it seems that the theory says it depends whether the government thinks that it's going to lose votes by disobeying. If the government thinks that public opinion supports the particular action, and on immigration of Salvadorians, of Venezuelans in Salvador, it does, then they're going to disobey it. If they think they're going to lose votes, as Barry Weingass, I don't know if it's in your syllabus, or Jim Fearon have models which say, if the government commits a patently unconstitutional act, then all of the people will rise against it. Actually, the first person who said that was Montesquieu, yes. There'll be a revolution which everybody is going to rise to restore the constitutional status quo. Okay? We don't know. But this is where we are, as far as law is concerned. What I want to emphasize is that this program is revolutionary. It's a revolutionary program of the change of the role of the government in society, which is reducing government employment and elimination of all kinds of programs. I mean, probably just give here examples here. It includes weather forecasting, it includes school lunches, but it's innumerable. Almost every program, and in particular, every regulatory regulatory agency in the country. The ultimate dream is to isolate the country completely and to abolish taxes and to derive income only from tariffs. Abolishment of income tax. So the long dream of program 2025 in the United States. So as you see, I was very wise in retrospect, yes? In retrospect, I knew when democracy survives and when it doesn't. I knew, as a matter of fact, that in the United States, the probability of democracy would not survive was 1 in 0.18 million. But now, we don't know. Some of my friends, strong faith both in American institutions and in the probability results that I gave to you, the statistical results that I gave to you, think these policies are going to create an economic disaster. Every sign is that they are. Republicans will lose the election, probably already the midterm, if not the presidential, and go home. Others think they will lose the election and not go home. Or they will win the elections by a combination of fraud and violence at the local level. And we don't know. But here is what creates an intellectual crisis for me. It's an intellectual crisis. How can it happen? Just think of it. I mean, all of the history. This is 250 years almost of democracy. It was a civil war, with conflicts, and everything else. But even during the Civil War, institutions worked, elections continued. And suddenly, 2 months, I could go on and on the details, but it seems that they're really destroying democracy. How is that possible? Some people say, well, it's just a random fluke, okay? The event has a probability of 1 in 0.18 million. That's not zero. It can happen. Some say that it's an unprecedented combination of conditions. If you had read the Marxists of the 1970s, Althusser, you would know that was called the conjuncture. These were changes which were due to the fact that conditions that have never occurred at the same time occurred, and they produced discrete changes. This is the theory of the rise of capitalism according to Althusser and Balibar. So maybe there's some conditions that always existed, but never in this kind of a combination we see now. Or there was just something wrong with all of our thinking, including our statistical models. All of our results depended on something that we didn't see, that we didn't include just because it was obvious, and suddenly that something is no longer there, or it was not there and it's now there. So some people say, no, it will not fall, as I said. But I think at the moment it's extremely likely it will fall. Which of these explanations is true? What are the possible conditions that change? What is it? I don't know. I am keeping a daily diary of the events. You have a reference over there. Want to see what I think about things, follow it. And I'm keeping it for the specific reason with which I started. In retrospect, we will know everything. We will be able to explain everything. In retrospect, the United States, now it's just going to become a data point. It will fit, not fit. Maybe it's going to be an outlier, but everything is going to be clear. In prospect, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows where this is going to end, what the retrospect will be. Is it going to be that democracy is in fact going to survive, or is it going to be that it's going to collapse in one form or another? Thank you. Not only questions, but comments, objections, suggestions.
Well, first of all, thank you for the lecture. It was really interesting. I'm not sure, can I be heard? All right. My question is, if in such a crucial moment in politics, political science fails to predict, then what is the use of the field? Isn't it kind of when economics failed to predict the financial crisis? What do you think the use for political science is if in prospect it can't really look in the future?
Superb. That's a question I'm asking myself. Economics, on economic forecasts, one economist, not liked by economists, once said something which I often repeat, is that the only function of economic forecasts is to legitimize astrology. I mean, in terms of forecasting, economists are terrible. Okay? Look, obviously, I'm in an intellectual crisis. I think that discipline is in an intellectual crisis. I do find when I write the diary, I think I find instruments of analysis of particular events that come from political science. Give you an example. So one of the things that everybody's observing right now is that all kinds of firms and individuals are intimidated by the government. University of Columbia, which was a target, yielded. Most law firms that were target yielded. The media that was previously sued by Trump preferred to give him some tens of millions of dollars than contest the cases in court. Everybody's intimidated. Why? Well, we have an apparatus for it. We have a collection action problem. We have Schelling's models of collective action. Yes, we know that people are playing a game in which the first one who would stick their head out is going to have it cut. So everybody is shying. The strength is only in numbers, but it's a prisoner's dilemma, et cetera, et cetera. That's an instrument for social science, and I think it makes sense. And all I'm saying is that as I kind of comment on daily events, from time to time, I'm just completely at a loss. But very often, I find instruments to think in political science or economics. But the crisis is there. This is disaster. I mean, intellectually, it's a disaster.
Okay, thanks a lot. I enjoyed the lecture. My question is, you mentioned two very important factors that can disrupt a democracy. That is the wealth that influences democracy, the wealth of the country, and then the alternation of power. I would like to know in your research or your studies if you've noticed any variations among the different forms of democracy in relation to these factors. For example, parliamentary style, presidential styles, and mixed combinations. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a big literature on this topic. That is literature which distinguishes parliamentary systems and presidential systems, and sometimes semi-presidential systems, and their survival. There was a series of very influential articles by Juan Lintz in 1990. The most influential one was called The Perils of Presidentialism, in which Lintz thought that presidential democracies are weaker than parliamentary ones because they are most likely to experience an institutional crisis in which the one party controls the executive, the president, and another controls majority in the parliament, and conflicts arise and nobody knows how to solve it. That's what he thought. I don't think that this is supported by empirical research. There is an influential book by José Antonio Cheboub on parliamentarism and presidentialism, in which he shows that the fragility, because if you do the statistics, you will find that presidential systems are more fragile. But he found that the fragility of presidential systems in Latin America is due to the military legacy, to the fact that the military, even though they withdraw into the barracks, they're still in the barracks and they influence policy, and not to the presidential system per se. So I would say that probably today we don't think that there is a difference in survival between the regimes, but it's open to question. Yeah, go ahead. Wait. You really have work to do.
Thank you. Thank you. Actually, I've read lots of your paper, especially on authoritarianism and also democracy. And I'm quite curious how you would analyze the current situation in US and also the government or leadership style of Donald Trump, whether there is any similarity with the, let's just say, the authoritarian regimes we have in the world right now, for example, China, Russia, or previously Soviet Union or the People's Republic of Poland. I wonder how would you look at this thing from the framework of authoritarianism study instead of democracy?
When I'm writing this commentary on the daily events, I've been really trying to stay away from this kind of analogies, and particularly analogies with Germany in 1933. And you know what? I can't stay away from it. If you read my Substack, you will see I just read an account by somebody who became a very prominent management scientist at NYU, Peter Drucker, was Austrian. He wrote a biography I didn't know about. Somebody pointed it out to me. And he describes a meeting at the University of Frankfurt a few months after Hitler assumed power, in which the Nazi commissar comes in and says, you do this, you do this, you do this, otherwise you go to the concentration camp. And a prominent liberal biologist asked him, but are you going to support research on this or that? And the answer is yes. We are going to support science that supports racial purity. And you know what? Columbia University. I don't know if you know what happened at Columbia, but the parallel was just, I couldn't stay away from it. Yeah. The government, if you don't know, the government issued an ultimatum of about 10 points to Columbia. If there are students have to wear masks, they limit access, and the university has to put under tutelage a department of Far Asia, Middle East, and South and African studies for at least 5 years. This is central government telling the university what to do as an academic department. Columbia yielded. So I don't know. You see, I'm quite pessimistic over this issue, but specifically with regard to the analogy to others, I'll tell you something else. Yeah. I grew in Poland under communism. And I discovered writing the diary that I have an instinct, it's deeply into me, to preserve anonymity of anybody I talk to or read. When I write about people, I don't specify gender, age, my relation to them, nothing. Yeah? And I rediscovered that as an instinct. The feeling of intimidation is there.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor. It's a very important question you have asked. I've been thinking as well that would it not be, would the fall, if any, not be contributed to by electoral system? Because when you look at democracy from America to Europe, Britain, and maybe the younger democracies, there is always that the embrace of first past the post system. But proportional representation, which should have been the case really, so that votes of millions of people are not wasted. Would it not be helpful if proportional representation system is the one that is embraced in most of these democratic societies?
Your proposal is on the table among some Democrats in the United States, some members of the Democratic Party. They want a proportional representation system. I shouldn't speak to this topic because the expert in here is Ruben, whose dissertation on that topic I supervised. When you start looking at the cases of backsliding and try to see where it occurs, so far it seems to be equally likely to occur under parliamentarism and presidentialism and under different electoral systems. So I don't know. I mean, my answer is, I don't know. There are good reasons to like proportional representation. There are good reasons not to like proportional representation because it doesn't produce clear majorities, yes. It's an ongoing debate. Countries experiment with it in different ways, yes. But I don't really know. I don't know.
Hi, thank you for the lecture. It's really interesting. I just wanted to ask, how useful is it to use the US as an example to study the potential fall of democracy? Because it seems to me that the US is not and has never been a democracy, but rather an oligarchy. And perhaps what we're witnessing right now isn't so much Trump destroying democracy, but rather destabilizing oligarchy.
Look, some of you may know, I have a very stripped down understanding of democracy. I think democracy is a system in which governments lose elections, to quote Mike. That is, in which elections are competitive. We don't know beforehand who's going to win, yes. Perhaps we vote and then we run to open the television and to see what the results are, yes? And all of that happens in relative freedom, relative peace. Now, as you know, this is not why most people value democracy. This is not what kids are taught in civics courses, yes? All kinds of ideals, norms, values are attached to democracy. I think that these norms and values are precisely the subjects of conflicts which have to be processed by the mechanism of elections. So, oligarchy. Well, the income distribution in the United States is, as you know, very unequal, has been increasingly unequal over the past six Clinton, basically, since middle 90s. You look at some of these numbers here, it's insane, okay? 1% of the population owns 50% of GDP, of wealth. 50% of the population owns 1%. Any number you look at in terms of distribution, is just terrifying. How that translates into political power is a question which we studied. I wrote on it myself. And now it's very much under observation and discussion in the United States. Because, well, Musk, yes, everybody comes to mind. The wealthiest man in the world, who 2 months ago was worth $400 billion, most of it due to government contracts, who is now trying to disarm the national NASA, the space agency, so it would be replaced by his private firm, SpaceX. It very much looks like oligarchs grabbing the government. It's somewhat more complicated, if I may, puzzles me. A lot of the ardent supporters now of the government are, we call it tech brothers, technocrats, yes? People who believe in technology and very much into AI. For example, the government is clearly dismantling a lot of the health research, biological research in general, and health research in particular. Almost all, 98% of drugs approved by the government in the last 10 years were a result of research financed by this health agency, National Institute of Health. $1 invested in health research generates over $8 in 8 years in applications. So from health point of view, from the economic point of view, it seems unimaginable. Why do they do that? Well, some of biologists say that they do it because they think that they can develop new drugs using artificial intelligence without doing additional research. That the body of accumulated knowledge is not sufficient, that now you just run a computer and have AI produce new drugs. There is something to it broader than health. Namely, it may well be that these people believe in technology so much that they don't need cooperation of anybody else. They don't need bankers. Computer programs are going to be doing it. Bricklayers, I'm not sure, but doctors, certainly. So there is a vision of the world. I mean, it's an ideology with a vision of the world in which basically technology will do everything. People are not necessary.
Thank you so much, Professor Przeworski, for this magnificent lecture. And I'm sorry, but maybe you can tell some words about Russia and its perspective for this democratical transition, if we are speaking about perspective of 10 years or maybe 15 years. Thank you so much.
I cannot. I know nothing about Russia. Sorry. If you have not read what's it called in English? The Wizard of Kremlin by an Italian journalist. It's kind of biography written as a novel of Vladimir Surkov, who was one of the Russian ideologues at one time, but it's really a portrait of Putin that's really worth reading. And it's worth reading. That's the only thing I know is because it convinced me that negotiating with Putin is just futile. That he is not into negotiations. He is into replacing the rightful place of Russia in the history of the world. But I know nothing about Russia. I'll stop there. I think you. Yeah, people are not here without the.
Well, first, thank you very much for your lecture. That was very interesting. 2 questions. So when you said some people say that we overlooked factors, do you have a hunch?
That we overlooked?
Overlooked factors that might matter. So I'm thinking in terms of media reality, alternative facts, so on. The other question I had is, I'm very puzzled by the weakness of the opposition in the US. Is it only intimidation? What's going on? Why is it basically Bernie Sanders touring the country and not much else happening? Or is it just the wrong perception we have in Europe? And perhaps lastly, what would you be able to do as a citizen in other countries, i.e. European countries, to support the opposition in the United States and to help the US democracy from not falling?
Well, I know what I would do in France. On Saturday, I would go to the Place de la République. Because why? Because there is a tradition, decades long, that if you like something or don't like it, on Saturday, you're on the Place de la République. No, I'm not saying that lightly. The US doesn't have that tradition. It doesn't have the tradition of mass protests. It doesn't have the tradition of mass protests, perhaps to some extent because of geographical reasons. You have to go to Washington. That's not where many people live. That's where government bureaucrats to some extent live and whatnot. So there are famous marches in Washington, Martin Luther King, the Women's March, 1.5 million people and whatnot. But it doesn't have the tradition that France has, Spain has, Italy has, that when there is political heat, you go on the street. I think that's one. 2, the Democratic Party is a very loose coalition. And it's a very loose coalition which to some extent reflects the constituencies of the representatives elected by the Republican Party. Traditionally in the United States, as you know, parties are very loose organizations. There's no party discipline, yes? It's not Spain, it's not UK, yes? You vote one way, you vote another way, Republican or Democrat if you want to. Nobody else decides that. Trump succeeded in turning Republicans into a party. They all vote unanimously, using coercion, threat of violence, pizzas delivered anonymously to Republican congressmen with the sign, "We know where you live." Okay? But he disciplined the Republican Party completely. There's no way of disciplining the Democratic Party. Okay? So the opposition doesn't come from the Democratic Party. From the streets, the problem with streets also is that maybe it's too early. And maybe a generalized protest against the government would be what John McGurk said we should not be doing. This government won an election with a program. It's implementing its program. I think protests start being successful under 2 conditions. One is when the general popularity of government really tanks. So, you know, when Trump goes under 40% maybe, but protests are often successful on particular well-defined issues. When a government wins an election, it wins an election having proposed 100 things. As a matter of fact, in the Trump's cases, I think 700 pages, the program 2025, yes? People have one vote. So they support the government or oppose the government on the balance. It doesn't mean that there's majority support for every policy. So the strategy is to find a policy where the government is clearly in the minority and organize well-focused protests around that issue. That's happening with science. I mean, Republicans do die of cancer, but they should be concerned about health. So there was already a demonstration in defense of science, was not very massive, but it seems to me that at this moment is the only feasible form of resistance. This is one problem with these backsliding processes is that at the very beginning, it often seems too early to protest because it's anti-democratic or because government is popular. When Erdogan came to power for the first time in Turkey, there was and he allowed the use of Islamic scarves in public places. There was a demonstration against him. It was easily repressed, and most public opinion thought, you know, he just won an election with that program. That was illegitimate. So if you do it too early, it's too early. But if you wait, and the government is playing the dirty game that they're playing, it's going to be too late. So this is the dilemma, so that the timing, the form of the timing of the opposition is something that we try to understand as political scientists, by the way. And I think we understand some of it, but not too much of it.
Sorry. Thank you. Thank you for the lecture. You mentioned that, well, that you've tried to stay away from the rhetoric of personality and that you couldn't help but find yourself in that place. And I wonder if you are leaning into believing that what is going on with Trump is a product of institutional design, or is it just a combination of a past presidency where he was able to set some groundwork, if it was maybe a planned process, if it appears more random. It does appear in the media more erratic, but at the same time, it certainly co-opts or incorporates the economic elite of the United States. And you mentioned, you know, the market and the cooperation of the market as a constraint, but it feels like it's a central element of Trump's government. So I wonder how you perceive those interactions coming into play.
Again, it's hard to make sense of it. They have a program. That's different from 2016. You know, there's a big, long program. And Trump disclaimed in the campaign at one time his allegiance to that program to 2025 or whatnot. He's following it. And people around him are following. So that's clear. They obviously don't have the personnel. It seems that the people whom they appointed are just incompetent. They fire people, rehire them. I mean, the most famous story is they fire at the beginning a lot of people, tens, not a lot, tens of people from the agency which supervises national security. And then the two directors of the agency said, no, you cannot do that. That's extraordinarily dangerous. And these people know things that we don't know as directors. We need them. So they try to rehire them, but they erase all of their files, including their addresses and their emails, okay? So, there is chaos. Yeah? As I write, you know, they're operating what President Milei in Argentina took as its symbol, and I always forget the English word for it. Motosierra, the chainsaw, okay? They're using the chainsaw where they should be using, you know, clippers or scalpels. Yes, just cut everything and see, you know, what falls. Then there's personality of Trump, who is extraordinarily vindictive. That's clear. He remembers his enemies from 8 years ago, and he goes after them one by one. I mean, some people think, New York Times thinks that the government went after $400 million against Columbia University because some years ago, Trump wanted to sell some land to Columbia University for $400 million, and Columbia refused. I mean, he's insanely vindictive. The question that I'm asking myself all the time, and which really forms the core of my puzzle, is pursuing a policy that's going to hurt a lot of their supporters. I mean, every forecast is that the economy is going to go down. They are dismantling programs which are vital for a lot of his supporters. They're deregulating everything, which is going to create some enormous havoc. Are they doing it knowing? Are they doing it because they're not concerned about the election? That's the question I'm asking myself. Why are they doing it? Okay? Optimists say they're doing as much as possible, as quickly as possible, trying to beat the awakening of the Congress. Because at one time, the Congress is going to awake. When the election is going to start coming, they'll see that Republicans in the Congress will see that they're going to be losing the election, and then they're going to stop following Trump. So they're trying to do as much as possible, as quickly as possible. Perhaps. I don't know. But so far, they're behaving as if there were no elections on the horizon. Thank
you very much for your talk. You mentioned at the start that one of the biggest factors that helps political actors maintain a democracy is the expectation that even if they lost, they will win a future election. I was wondering, especially in the past decade in the US, with this whiplash of political changes, it almost seems as if whenever a party gets into government and makes any changes, the second that this party switches, all of these changes are wasted. And sometimes it even seems like this system is kind of self-destructive in a sense, and we're not really going anywhere. So I was wondering what kind of implications you think this has on the survival of democracy, and if there might be any solution for this kind of paradox that exists.
This is a deep topic, deep for the hour. So, Americans think that they have, well, I can put it personally. When I arrived as a graduate student in the United States, I was forced to read a textbook in American government. And the first sentence in the textbook said, the United States has the best system of government in the world. The question now is, well, does it? Was the evidence economic success? Unquestionable. Political stability, democracy? Unquestionable. That's the evidence in favor of the thesis. The economic question now is, suppose that the United States had a different institutional system. Given its natural resources, would the outcome have not been the same? It's a counterfactual question. It's impossible to answer, but there is a new kind of historical line asking about that. My personal opinion is that it's a terrible system in many ways, but yeah, I'm not going to go there. It survived 250 years, was economically very successful. That's all we know. Last one, Christoph.
Okay, thank you very much. I agree with everyone else in the price for this lecture, and I really loved it. One thing that came to mind while listening to this is I remember there was a moment shortly before elections where it felt like Trump was about to like lose everything. He was supposed to be almost put in jail, like nobody was going to bail him out, and it felt like there's no way he's gonna survive this moment. So I just wonder whether this might be a situation in which he realizes that we're in this situation, maybe that is more akin to some democracies in African countries or in Asian places, where once you get out of power after having indulged in some sort of evil, as the previous lecture argued, you are not gonna be able to.
I completely agree. I completely agree. For him, the stakes were enormous. I completely agree. And this is why I think he may be playing all or nothing game. Maybe just saying, I'm going to go with everything and I don't care about anything else. Either I win everything or I lose everything. Could well be. I agree.
Thank you so much. We are now going to,